Mitzrayim, Be'emes Yaloi, Me'yam Lo'ayes, V'sa Yehuda, Ve'u'ekachoi, Yehu Yisrael, Amachila V'sa, Hayavayam Roa, V'Hayavanos, Havayadeh, Yisrael Yachon, Heve'arim, Rakuviyadeh, Hayem, Avam, Azir, Netzai, Havayam, Kivitzanos, Havayadeh, Yisrael Yachon, Heve'arim, Kilukeyedeh, Heve'avam, Azir, Netzai, V'Le'yala, V'Le'yavanem, V'Le'yam, Havayavanon, Havayim, Atzoragam, Hayim, Talam, Mishna,
Good evening. How's everybody doing? Excuse me. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Bella in Florida, Carla in Brazil, Sharon in New Jersey, Melissa in Great Neck, Paula in Chicago, Paula in the Great Northwest, Shandora in the Bronx, John in Maine, Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. Our numbers are a little lower than usual. Why? I'm sure it's because we've been making posts in support of Israel, calling for prayers for the peace of Israel, for the release of the hostages, etc. And this platform's algorithms, run by the same sorts of people who do not condemn the terrorist attacks or protect our children in the universities of America. Enough said. We have a very interesting daf today. I'd like to dedicate our learning today to the release of the hostages. I told you that yesterday I attended a Zoom where there were parents of hostages. It was just heartbreaking to watch. I told you yesterday about Rachel, whose son Hirsch is a hostage. And there's also a gentleman named Avichai, a young man whose wife and 3 children under the age of 10 are, as far as he knows, hostages in Hamas. He hasn't had any word from them in 27 days. May they be released. Please, God, release all the hostages, and we dedicate our learning today to that. Very proud of Nina also. She made 5 pounds of challah today, so she could say the bracha. And as she was kneading the dough, she spoke aloud every name of the hostages. May they all be released soon. And we say amen. Okay, we are continuing. We picked this up at the bottom of page 75b. We're in chapter 4, discussing Mishnah number 2. And we've been talking about the Samaritans, in Hebrew, the Kutim, these people from various countries, surrounding countries, who were brought into Israel after the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel. This was in the First Temple period. The 10 tribes, the northern tribes, were exiled. They were replaced by these other people. Those other people found that the land of Israel rejects idolatry. And so they converted to Judaism, but they didn't go all the way, as it were. Some people say that they're called lion converts because, not lion, like they're lying people, but lions, because they were afraid of the lions that roamed in Samaria, and that's why they're called Samaritans. And so their conversion was not a wholehearted conversion for the purpose of becoming Jews, but rather to save their lives from these lions. And so this had consequences in later generations. And our sages are talking about that now. So when Rabin came from Eretz Yisrael, right, from the Jewish community in Israel under the Roman occupation, to the Jewish community in Bavel, in Babylonia, he reported that Rabbi Chia bar Abba says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, and some say that it was Rabbi Abba bar Zavda who says, that Rabbi Hanina says, and some say that it was Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi who says, that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says. What do they all say? There are 3 divisions of opinions with regard to this matter of the Samaritans. Rabbi Yishmael holds that Samaritans are lion converts, and the priests, the Kohanim, who assimilated among the Samaritans, were unfit priests, as it is stated, 2 Kings 17:32, and made unto them from among themselves priests of the high places. And Rabbah bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, what is the meaning of from among themselves? This means from the thorns that are among the Jewish people, meaning those of flawed lineage, right? When we talk about flawed lineage, we mean either mamzers, who are the offspring of incest or the offspring of adultery, or the offspring of a priest who married a woman that was prohibited to him, like a divorcee or a zona, as we've been talking about, among other people. And so what happened? So from the thorns that are among the Jewish people, meaning those of flawed lineage. And it was due to that reason that the sages disqualified them, the Samaritans, not due to the Samaritans themselves, whom the sages just considered to be Gentiles, but rather due to the Jews of flawed lineage who assimilated among them. So when a Samaritan seeks to marry another Samaritan, it is possible that one of them is a Jew, albeit of flawed lineage. And Rabbi Akiva holds Samaritans are true converts, and the priests who assimilated among them were fit priests, not of flawed lineage, fit to serve in the temple, as it is stated, same verse, and made unto them from among themselves priests of the high places. And Rabbah bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says from among themselves means from the chosen ones, the upper echelon of the Jewish people. And for what reason did the sages prohibit the Samaritans, from entering into the congregation if there is no problem with regard to their conversion or with regard to the Jews who assimilated among them? It is because they, the Samaritans, did not act in accordance with the law, the halacha, as they would perform levirate marriage, yibum, with betrothed women. Only with betrothed women, right? So the whole idea that we've talked about many times, under Jewish law, if a man is married and he dies without having had children and he leaves a brother, so his surviving brother and the widow have an obligation to marry each other so that their first child will be the heir of the brother who died childless. If they choose not to marry each other, they have to perform the ceremony of chalitza. Then they're free to go and marry whoever they want, but only after performing that ceremony. The Samaritans had a sort of their own interpretation of this law. As we shall see, they decided that it only applied to betrothed women, that a betrothed woman, she was betrothed, not fully married yet, but as we've seen, to break up a betrothal requires a get, a bill of divorce. And so the Samaritans said it's only in that case, a betrothed woman who was widowed, that yibum applies. But if she was fully married to the man, then yibum does not apply. We've never heard that law anywhere else. That's something that the Samaritans made up out of their own interpretation of the written Torah. Because their interpretation was different than the rest of the Jewish people, they would release these married women to, who are widowed, to go marry other men without having performed chalitza with the brother-in-law, and that means that thereafter, whoever they married, they were not fit to marry that person and would even produce a mamzer. Let's see how this played out, right? Because the Samaritans did not act in accordance with the law, with the halacha, as they would perform levirate marriage with betrothed women only. They would perform the mitzvah of yibum, and they would exempt married women from chalitza and yibum. And the Gemara explains, in what way would they expound the verse to lead them to this conclusion? And now we're on 76a. The verse states, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside of the family to one not of his kin. Her brother-in-law will have intercourse with her and take her to him to be his wife and consummate the levirate marriage. Yibum. That's Deuteronomy 25:5. And they, the Samaritans, understood the word outside to be a description of the woman, meaning she who sits outside, i.e. one who is only betrothed and not yet fully married. she shall not be married to one not of his kin, and it is with her that the obligation of yibum applies. But she who is not sitting outside, meaning a woman who is already married when she is widowed, she shall marry one not of his kin. Yibum doesn't apply to her, according to the Samaritans. So consequently, the concern with regard to the Samaritans is that their descendants include the children of a widow who unlawfully wed one who was not her brother-in-law without having gone through chalitza. After having explained which prohibition the Samaritans violated, the Gemara now explains how this accounts for the prohibition with regard to marriage with Samaritans. And Rabbi Akiva conforms to his standard line of reasoning, as he says, the offspring of intercourse for which one is liable for violating a prohibition, this offspring is a mamzer. Right? Rabbi Akiva's definition of who is a mamzer is much broader than the other sages, and it is not the law. Right? Rabbi Akiva says even the son, let's say, of a priest who married a divorced woman would be a mamzer, and we know that that's not a mamzer. So Rabbi Akiva's definition of mamzer is more broad. But here, a woman, a yavama, who did not perform halitza with her yavam and just went off and married someone else, that produces a mamzer according to the view of Rabbi Akiva. Therefore, the descendants of a yavama who had transgressed the prohibition of the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside of the family to one not of his kin, these people have the status of mamzers. And some say a third opinion as to why the sages disqualified Samaritans from marriage. It is because they are not well versed in the details of mitzvahs, of the commandments. And the Gemara asks, who is the one indicated by the phrase, some say? Rav Idi bar Avin said, this is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, the great Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Tractate Pesachim, the matzah, right, the matzah that we eat on Passover, of a Samaritan is permitted to be eaten on Passover and is not considered to be chametz, leavened bread, and a person can fulfill his obligation to eat matzah on the first night of Passover with it. Recall that during the week of Passover, you're not allowed to eat leavened bread on any day, but you don't have to eat matzah. You can just decline to eat matzah on all the days of Passover except the first night. On the first night, every Jew has an obligation to eat matzah. Can you eat matzah that was baked by a Samaritan? According to this, yes, you can. Sounds like they're not so gentile-y, right? We would not eat matzah, just prepared in some like random kitchen by somebody learning how to make matzah. There's many, many laws that make matzah qualified to be kosher for Passover and to be eaten on the first night of Passover. It sounds like these Samaritans, if we can eat their matzah on the first night of Passover, they were not so far removed from the Jewish people. So what's going on here? But Rabbi Eliezer prohibits eating the matzah of a Samaritan. Why? Since Samaritans are not well versed in the details of the commandments, and there is concern that their matzah might be leavened. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, that is not a concern, as with regard to any mitzvah that the Samaritans embraced and accepted, they are more exacting in its observance than are Jews. Now, again, he's referring to the Samaritans as not Jews. They're not Jews. They're considered Gentiles by the sages because they, so to speak, picked and chose what commandments they would take on. More or less, they were like the Karaites that subscribed to the written Torah, but not to the oral Torah. But as we well know, when God gave the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai on behalf of the Jewish people, he gave him the written Torah and the kernel, the seeds of the oral Torah and the process of the oral Torah with the instruction in the written Torah that you shall listen to the elders of the generation. And it is our elders, our sages, who help us understand what the written Torah says. Right? The written Torah, for example, says, you shall bind these words as a sign upon your arm and as a symbol before your eyes. That's tefillin. Would you know what tefillin is? That it's black leather straps, boxes with verses from the Torah inside. Nowhere is that detailed in the Torah. And yet tefillin, I'll sneeze soon, I hope. Excuse me. And yet tefillin is one of the most important commandments that Jewish men are obligated to do every day. And we wouldn't even know what it is from the written Torah. The oral Torah is half the Torah. There is no way to disentwine the written Torah and oral Torah. They are one together. So these Samaritans who, joined the Jewish people much later in our history and say what they think Judaism should be, do we need to say more? So at any rate, Rabbi Eliezer prohibits eating the matzah of Samaritans. Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, listen, okay. In terms of the mitzvahs that they took on, they're very detail-oriented about it, so we can eat their matzah, but we don't consider them to be Jews. Now, the Gemara asks, but here, with regard to marriage, in what details are they not well-versed? Okay, so they seem to know how to make matzah. What are the details of marriage which the Samaritans don't understand? And the Gemara answers, it is because they are not well versed with regard to the laws of betrothal and divorce. Consequently, it is possible that their bills of divorce were invalid, or that a betrothed woman was allowed to remarry without having received a bill of divorce, which would mean that she was never divorced, and when she went ahead and thought she married her second husband, she was still married to her first husband. The second ceremony was meaningless, and all the children by that, alleged second husband are really children born of adultery because she's still married to the first husband. And that's why there's many mamzers among the Samaritans, according to this opinion. Rav Nachman says that Rabba bar Abu says Samaritans are of flawed lineage. Why? Because a mamzer resulting from intercourse between a man and his sister, and a mamzer resulting from intercourse between a man and his brother's wife, were assimilated among them. And they therefore all have the status of mamzers due to the uncertainty as to the identity of those assimilated mamzers. And the Gemara asks, what is he teaching us by providing the details of how they are mamzers due to uncertainty? If he intended to incidentally teach us the law that the offspring from intercourse for which one is liable to receive karas, death at the hands of the heavenly court, is a mamzer, well, let him teach one example by mentioning the example of a mamzer from a sister. Why do we need these two examples? And the Gemara answers, he did not mention these details to teach us a law, but rather the incident that took place in this way. And that is why the Samaritans were considered to be of flawed lineage. It's not that hypothetically, some mamzers might have been assimilated into the Samaritans because they weren't careful. It's that the sages knew. There was a historical record that some mamzers that Jews would not marry did marry into the Samaritan community. And at that point, since that was permitted by the Samaritans, all of the Samaritans were deemed flawed lineage. And Rava says a Canaanite slave, or at least presumptive status of flawed lineage. And Rava says a Canaanite slave and a Canaanite maidservant were assimilated among them. And the Gemara asks, in these cases, the prohibition is due to what? It is due to a Canaanite maidservant whose children are slaves. But if so, let him teach one example. Why also mention a Canaanite male slave, whose children resulting from intercourse with a Jewish woman is of unflawed lineage, right? If a Gentile, in this case a Canaanite slave, has intercourse with a Jewish woman and they produce a child, there is no marriage under Jewish law between a Jewish woman and a non-Jew. But the child of that union is not a mamzer at all, is not even of a flawed lineage, right? That's the child of a Jewish woman is a Jew, full stop, even if the father is a non-Jew. So why are they teaching both the Canaanite slave, male and female? And the Gemara again answers, because the incident that took place in this way. The Samaritans accepted to marry, to have these Canaanite slaves marry into their community, and that made the whole community suspect. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 4. Here's Mishnah number 3. A priest who marries a woman who is the daughter of a priest, right? Simple picture, right? The Kohanim, the descendants of Aaron, Moses' brother, who were blessed by God to be the lineage of the priests who serve in the temple. Got it? So, over time, there are many Kohanim, and pretty much anybody named Cohen is a descendant of Aaron. Okay, so you have a Cohen who is qualified to serve in the temple when the temple is standing, and he marries the daughter of another Cohen, right? Not a brother or a cousin, distant enough family. There's none of that kind of issue. But so a priest is marrying the daughter of another priestly family. Got it? Okay. A priest who marries a woman who is the daughter of a priest must investigate with regard to her background, i.e., he must check previous generations of her family tree from both the maternal and paternal sides for 4 mothers, right? The girl's mother, her grandmothers, and her great-grandmothers, right? For 4 mothers, which are 8. How so? He investigates the lineage of her mother, and the mother of her mother, and the mother of her mother's father, and her mother, the mother of her mother's father's mother. And this priest who's marrying the daughter of a priest, he also investigates the lineage of the mother of her father and her mother, i.e. the mother of her father's mother, and the mother of her father's father, and her mother, i.e. the mother of her father's father's mother. And if he seeks to marry a Levite woman or an Israelite woman, he adds to these an investigation of mothers for 1 additional generation going back. You're like, what? Why does he investigate so many people? And it's because priests are held to this extremely high standard if we're talking about a priest who is going to be qualified to serve in the Holy Temple when the temple is standing and to bring offerings on behalf of the Jewish people. He has to know that this woman that he's marrying is not the daughter of a disqualified priest, which would render her children disqualified, might even render her a halal and render him, the priest marrying her, disqualified. That's why he has to be so careful. Now, with regard to these investigations, one need not investigate from the altar and above. What does that mean? If his ancestors included a priest who served at the altar, one checks no further, right? If a priest seeks to marry the daughter of another priest, and that other priest has already served in the temple, no further investigation is needed, because any priest who served in the temple, his lineage was checked for many generations. So they knew who was serving the temple, that there was no flaw in their lineage. Nor do they check from the platform. The platform, what does this mean? This is like my family, the Levites, right? So Levites have a role to play when the temple is standing. We are sort of the servants of the Kohanim, of the priests. We do the tasks that they don't need to do. And the Levites are the sweet singers of Israel. That phrase is usually mean King David. But when the temple is standing, there's a choir there, right? And it's a choir of Levites. And they are singing beautiful, beautiful psalms and other songs that can be heard from far away. But if a Levite is going to sing in the choir or otherwise serve on the grounds of the Holy Temple, his lineage is checked, right, to make sure that he really is a descendant of Levi, the 3rd son of Jacob, and that his mother was Jewish, and her mother was Jewish, and her mother was Jewish, etc. But once you have an ancestor who served on the platform, you don't have to go further back than that, because you know that lineage was checked. And also, if even a Yisrael served on the Sanhedrin, we know that anyone who served in the Sanhedrin, the high court, the high rabbinic court in Jerusalem, anybody who served in the Sanhedrin, his lineage was checked. So you don't have to go check further back than somebody who served in the Sanhedrin. And similarly, anyone whose ancestors held public posts and anyone whose ancestors were charity collectors may marry into the priesthood, and there is no need to investigate their lineage, since no one of flawed lineage would be appointed to those positions. Rabbi Yosef says even the descendants of one who had signed as a witness in the old court of Tzipori do not need to have their lineage investigated. And Rabbi Hanina ben Antigonos says even the descendants of one who was written in the army list of the Jewish king do not need to have their lineage investigated. And that will be explained in the Gemara. Here's the Gemara. What is different about women that we investigate their lineage? And what is different about men that we don't investigate their lineage, right? We said that a priest is marrying the daughter of a priest, so he has to investigate her lineage. Doesn't she have to investigate his lineage? Why shouldn't we also examine the lineage of a bride's male ancestors for any possible flaw, as we do her female ancestors? And the Gemara answers, when women quarrel with each other, listen to this. This is why we have to investigate women's lineage but not men's lineage. It's not because it's a halakhic idea that we derive from the Torah. It's a very practical matter that comes from human nature. Why do we have to investigate the women's female ancestors but not her male ancestors? Because when women quarrel with each other, it is through accusations of engaging in forbidden sexual intercourse, i.e., they accuse each other of licentiousness, and so if it really happened, it will be publicized, the matter will become known, and the public will know if a woman, committed adultery. And if it is so that there is a matter of a flaw with regard to the lineage of the woman in question, it would not. Wait a minute, what? Oh, right. So they, in other words, women argue and accuse each other of adultery, of licentiousness, but not of having flawed lineage. By contrast, when men quarrel with each other, it is through accusations of flawed lineage that they quarrel. Therefore, if it is so that there is a matter of a flaw with regard to her father's lineage, it would generate publicity even if no investigation is conducted. Strange, right? I don't know that we would apply such a principle today necessarily, but very interesting. When you think about certain expressions, I have heard, not decades, but I remember hearing like kind of old Jewish men, kind of from the old world, just level an insult at another one and call him a mamzer. Not because he has any reason to believe that person is a mamzer, but, sort of to say that, well, the way you're behaving, only a mamzer would behave that way. So it is true that they kind of use this accusation of flawed lineage as just being quarrelsome. But because that happens, if there's any truth to it, according to this, it will come out, right? Whereas women, don't accuse other women of that. They accuse women of their own behavior, not about their parents' behavior, right? Interesting contrast. Now, the Gemara inquires, but she, right, this bride who's going to marry this priest, she should also investigate his lineage. Why is only the lineage of the woman investigated? Right, this is the question I asked initially, but first they asked, why are we only investigating the female ancestors of the bride? Now they're asking the question, why doesn't the bride have to investigate the lineage of the groom? And the Gemara comments, well, this supports Rav. As Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, it was not prohibited for women of unflawed lineage, i.e. daughters of priests, to marry men of flawed lineage, such as halalim, right, the sons of disqualified priests, or to marry converts, or to marry emancipated slaves. Therefore, women are not required to investigate the lineage of potential husbands. A Jewish woman can marry any other Jew. A priest is prohibited from marrying somebody of flawed lineage because it would disqualify him from serving in the temple. That's why it's his responsibility to investigate the lineage of his bride, but she's not violating anything if she marries a guy as long as he's a Jew. She doesn't care if his lineage is flawed or not because she's not violating a prohibition thereby. Rav Ada bar Ahava taught that one needs to investigate 4 mothers who are 12, adding an additional 2 generations of mothers for each of the woman's parents. And it was taught in Baraisa, 4 mothers who are 16, another generation back. And the Gemara asks, granted, according to Rav Ada bar Ahava, now we're on 76b, he interprets his statement as referring to a Levite woman or an Israelite woman about whom the Mishna states that one must investigate an additional generation. Therefore, Rav Ada bar Ahava's ruling accords with that of the Mishnah. But shall we say that the Baraisa disputes the Mishnah? And the Gemara rejects this. No. What is the meaning of the Mishnah's phrase, one additional? It means one pair, two more mothers on each side. So Rav Yehuda says that Rav says this Mishnah presents the statement of Rabbi Meir. But the rabbis say all families retain a presumptive status of fitness and do not require investigation. The Gemara asks, is that so? Did Rav really say this? But doesn't Rav Chama bar Guria say that Rav says our Mishnah is referring only to a case when an objection was registered about the family concerning its lineage? But if no objection was registered, everyone agrees that the family retains its presumptive status of fitness. And that, in fact, is the law. It's not that every priest who's marrying the daughter of a priest has to investigate her. It's if he has to investigate her, these are the people and the degree to which he has to investigate. But it's not that he has to investigate. He only has to investigate when somebody raises a problem, some kind of objection to the lineage of the bride. That is the halacha. And the Gemara answers, the one who taught this statement in the name of Rav did not teach that other statement. Now, there are those who say that this discussion occurred a little differently. It's like this. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says this Mishnah presents the statement of Rabbi Meir, but the rabbis say all families retain a presumptive status of fitness, meaning you don't have to investigate them unless a problem comes up. Rav Chama bar Guria says that Rav says when an objection is registered about a family concerning its lineage, then everyone agrees that he must investigate. But without such an objection, he doesn't have to investigate. Now, the Mishnah teaches that one need not investigate from the altar and above. If her father served in the temple, that means her family's already been investigated, no need to go further. So the Gemara answers, if the Sanhedrin had not examined his lineage, they would not have allowed him to ascend to the altar and perform the sacrificial rites. So the Mishnah further teaches, nor must one investigate from the platform and above. A Levite who was permitted to serve on the platform in the Holy Temple that does not need to be investigated further because the Sanhedrin already investigated him so that he could serve there. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason? The Gemara answers, it is as the Master said in his description of the temple chambers, in Tosefta Chagiga, for there in the hewn chamber, those of the priesthood with unflawed lineage and the Levites of unflawed lineage sat and examined the lineage of everyone who came to serve in the temple. The Mishnah also taught, nor need one investigate from the Sanhedrin and above, right? If somebody was permitted to serve on the Sanhedrin, he was already investigated. You don't have to investigate his ancestors any further. And the Gemara answers, how do we know this? It is as Rav Yosef taught, that just as the court is clean in justice, so too it is clean of any blemish, i.e. it does not include anyone of flawed lineage. Maremar said, what is the verse from which this is derived? It states from the Song of Songs 4:7, you are all fair, my love, and there is no blemish in you. Now the Gemara asks, but perhaps you should say that that verse is referring to an actual blemish, that one who has a physical blemish may not be appointed to the Sanhedrin. Rav Acha bar Yaakov said it is not necessary to derive the law that one who has a physical blemish may not be appointed to the Sanhedrin from this verse, as the verse states with regard to the transfer of the divine spirit from Moses to the elders, Numbers 11:16, that they may stand there with you. And the phrase, with you, is explained to mean with similarity to you, teaching that the members of the Sanhedrin must be whole in body like Moses. Now, is there any reason to think that if somebody has a physical blemish, they're incapable in any way or disqualified in any way from judging cases? Obviously not. But when we're talking about the great Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, like the priests, they were held to this incredibly high standard and included that requirement. Now, the Gemara rejects this proof, but perhaps those who were with Moses had to be free of any blemish due to the divine presence which rested upon them. But this is not a requirement for judges in the Sanhedrin. And Rav Nachman said that the verse states, so shall they make it easier for you and bear the burden with you. right? This is when Moses said, I can't do it anymore. I'm judging the people all day long. I'm exhausted. And his father-in-law, Yetro, suggested, no, you need help. You got to appoint other judges. And Moses checked with God, and God said, yeah, good idea. Appoint the whole system of judges. And, right there we see, how this commandment, which is actually incumbent on all humans, it's the first Noahide commandment, to establish a system of justice, courts of law. To pursue a just society, you must have a law-abiding society. Now, the Mishna teaches anyone whose ancestors held public posts may marry into the priesthood without investigation. The Gemara asks, is this to say that we do not establish officers and other public appointees from people with flawed lineage? And the Gemara raises a contradiction from the following statement. All are fit to judge cases of monetary law, but not all are fit to judge cases of capital law. And we discussed it. What does the word all serve to include? And Rav Yehuda says it serves to include a mamzer. A mamzer may judge cases of monetary law. He says a mamzer has a problem in terms of who he can marry. In every other way, he's a full-fledged Jew who can even serve as a judge in a rabbinic court. Now, this indicates that even a mamzer may occupy a public position. Abaye said the Mishna is referring to public officials in Jerusalem, where they were very particular that all their judges should be of unflawed lineage. And Rav Shimon bar Zera similarly taught in a baraisa of Kiddushin from the school of Levi. It is referring to public officials in Jerusalem. The Mishnah teaches, and anyone whose ancestors were charity collectors may marry into the priesthood without investigation. Now, is that because charity collectors are people who need to have, such an honest and unflawed background that before a charity collector would be appointed, they would investigate his lineage, like the priests who serve in the temple, the Levites who sang on the platform, or the judges who ruled on the Sanhedrin? No, it's a different reason. What is the reason for this? The Gemara answers, it is due to the fact that charity collectors quarrel with people. As the master said, those appointed to collect charity may forcibly take collateral for charity from those who have not fulfilled their obligations, even on the eve of Shabbos, when people are preoccupied and rushed, and this leads to quarrels. And if it is so that there is a flaw in the lineage of the collector's family, it would generate publicity through all these quarrels that are an unavoidable aspect of his job. So there wouldn't be a charity collector who it was revealed about and they had flawed lineage and the public wouldn't hear about it. Because they're in this quarrelsome, difficult position. If there was something wrong with them, everybody would know about it. The Gemara relates, Rav Ada bar Ahava's host was the son of a convert, and he and Rav Bevai were quarreling. So one said, I will perform the service of the city, i.e. I will be appointed to a position of authority. And the other one said, I will perform the service of the city. They came before Rav Yosef to decide between them. And Rav Yosef said to them, we learned, you shall set him king over you, whom the Lord your God shall choose, one from among your brothers. Now the repetition of the verb set in the verse, som tasim, set yourself, like that. All appointments that you appoint may be only from among your brothers, right? So the law was that when the Jews would have a king, right? When the Torah was given, there was no Jewish king, and there would not be a Jewish king for hundreds of years, right? Until King Saul finally became a king, because the people demanded that they should have a king. And of course, it was a terrible move on behalf of the people. They wanted to just be like the other nations. They had kings. We should have a king. God is our king. What did they need a king for? It was a problem. King Saul immediately became a problem, and he got the throne and lost the throne, and then was replaced by King David. Now, the law was that this king, when the Jews would finally have a king, that king shouldn't be some foreign monarch that we import because he has experience being a king and set him to be a king over us. The king must come from among us. Because there's an extra word in that verse that teaches that, they said not only the king, but anyone in positions of authority over us should come from among us. That's what the sages are teaching here. And therefore, a convert, one who was not born into the congregation, should not serve in these high positions of authority, according to this view. So Rav Ada bar Ahava said to Rav Yosef, and does this law apply even if the mother of the person in question is born Jewish? Right? If a Jewish woman married a convert, is the son of that union not permitted to have a very high office, high authority, high office of authority? Now they're asking. Rav Yosef said to him, if his mother is born Jewish, then the words from among your brothers are said about him. Therefore, now that it has been determined that this person's mother was born Jewish and that he is fit to serve a public role, so Rav Bevai, who is a great man in Torah learning, should oversee the matters of heaven, i.e. the public issues that involve the performance of mitzvahs. And the master, Rav Ada bar Ahava's host, should oversee the other matters of the city. In other words, they both got positions of authority, the convert and the one who neither of his parents were converts. So Abaye said, as a moral of the story, therefore, if one is a Torah scholar as a guest, let him host a person such as Rav Ada bar Ahava, who knows how to plead in his favor, as it was the argument of Rav Ada bar Ahava that led to the host's appointment as in a position of authority. Now the Gemara relates, Rabbi Zera would deal with converts and he would assign them to positions of authority. And similarly, Rabbi bar Abba would deal with them. In the West, Eretz Yisrael, they would not establish even an appointee over measurements from them, as they extended the prohibition against appointing a convert as a king to include all positions of power. Right? So in other words, in Jerusalem, converts did not receive the highest positions of authority, but in Babylonia they did. That's what we're learning. In Nehardea, they would not establish even an appointee over irrigation of the city's fields from them. Okay, so in Nehardea, they were more exacting, like in Jerusalem. The Mishna teaches that Rabbi Yosef says, even the descendants of one who signed as a witness in the old court at Tzipori does not need to be investigated if a priest is marrying the daughter of such a person. He doesn't have to worry if the girl's father or ancestor, right, served as a witness in the old court at Tzipori. We know that person's lineage has already been investigated. We don't have to go further back in the ancestry. Now, the Gemara. So, what is the reason for this? And the Gemara says, in that city, they would first examine witnesses and only afterwards have them sign. Consequently, anyone who signed as a witness in Tzipori must certainly have been of unflawed lineage. Now, the Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Hanina ben Antigonus says, even the descendants of one who was written in the army list of the Jewish king does not have to have their lineage investigated if his daughter would marry a priest. And Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says the reference is to one who was written in the list of the military troops of the house of King David, who were all of pure lineage. Rav Yosef said, what is the verse from which this is derived? Well, the phrase is, reckoned by lineage for service in war. That's 1 Chronicles 7:40. So the Gemara asks, and what is the reason for this requirement that the soldiers be of unflawed lineage? And Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, it is in order that their merit and the merit of their ancestors will help them in battle. So the Gemara asks, well, wait a minute. Don't we read in 2 Samuel 23:37 that Zelek the Ammonite was one of David's warriors, right? An Ammonite cannot marry into the congregation, even if he converts to Judaism. We've learned that. So what, is it not indicated that he was a convert who came from Ammon? And the Gemara rejects this. No. His name indicates that he lived in Ammon, but he was born a Jew. And the Gemara asks, but isn't there Uriah the Hittite, right? The husband of Bathsheba that David set his eyes on. 2 Samuel 23:39. And what is it not indicated? That Uriah came from Heth, right? That's what makes him a Hittite. And the Gemara says, no. His name only indicates that he lived there, not that he was a Hittite, a Hittite national and not born Jewish. So the Gemara further asks, but what about Ittai the Gittite? 2 Samuel 15:19. And if you would say also about him that his name indicates that he dwelled in Gat, but he was born a Jew, well, you can't say that. Because doesn't Rav Nachman say, to explain how David could make use of the crown of the idol of Ammon in apparent violation of the prohibition against deriving benefit from idolatry in any way, How is this possible? Because Ittai the Gittite came and nullified its status as an idol. And the law is that only a Gentile can nullify an idol by doing something degrading to it, and then takes it out of the status of being an idol, and only then could a Jew make use of it. And this indicates that Ittai the Gittite must have been a Gentile. I'm very close to done. If you've got questions or comments, please get them in. So the Gemara again questions the statement that all of the soldiers in David's army were of unflawed lineage. And further, Rabbi Yehuda says that Rav says David had 400 young men in his camp, and they were all the sons of beautiful women. Now, did that mean that they all had pretty moms? No. This sons of beautiful women, this is a defined term. This means that they were born to women who were captured in war, right? That soldiers, now the Torah states that if, during the wars of conquest, this would happen, that the men in the Jewish army, they would go to war, they would sack a town, they would kill the opposing army, and then they would take the women and children as slaves, right? That was just common practice in the ancient world. Now, another common practice when armies go to war, terrible as it is that the men ravish the women in those localities. The Torah comes and says, you can't do that, right? If you're going to be in the Jewish army, you can't be a bunch of rapists, okay? Now, there is this, lust of the soldier that came into war the way it was practiced in the ancient world. So the Torah said, okay, if you want to take that woman because you're so enthralled with her, all right, you capture her, you bring her back to your home, and she mourns for the loss of her family for a month and lets her hair and nails grow, and you calm down, and then you decide whether you're going to marry her or not. Right? So that was the law of women captured in battle. So when we're talking about David's army, there were a bunch of these young men, right, second generation soldiers whose fathers had captured women and decided to marry them. And that's who these boys were. Okay, well, what's wrong with that? But says the Gemara, i.e., born to women who were captured in war and who were Gentiles. These women never were brought into the Jewish faith. All of them had their hair cut into the kome. These young men had their hair cut into the kome style, or who grew their hair in a Gentile hairstyle on the back of their heads. And all of them sat in gold carts, and they would march at the head of the troops in David's army. And these very ones were the strong men of the house of David, right? They had a different status. They maybe weren't even Jews. They were like shock troops, like very tall, strong, fearsome, right? That they, their job was basically to scare the opposition. David would rely on their strength, and this states that David's army included men of flawed lineage. And the Gemara answers, these 400 young men didn't actually fight in the battles, but rather they would go forth in the front of the troops in order to frighten everyone. So that concludes our discussion of Mishna number 3. And when we pick this up tomorrow at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, we'll continue with Mishna number 4. Okay, let me see if we've got some questions on what's going on here. Kiddushin 76. Nina might not have had time to pass them over to me because we're having a house guest. I think she did. Okay, Sharon, did the Samaritans consider themselves Jews? I mean, they must have, to the extent that we had this controversy about them. But as we read yesterday in that background note, there was very contentious relations between the Samaritan community and the broader Jewish community. And there were times when the Samaritans sort of took sides against the Jews with foreign invaders. And there were other times when the Samaritans and the Jews were linked together, I believe as in the Bar Kokhba revolt against Rome. But because they had this problematic stance to Jewish law, it wasn't like the difference between, between like Sephardic and Ashkenaz. It was a more profound difference that they didn't subscribe to the sages and the oral tradition, and so the sages basically said they're not Jews. But Sharon asked, did they believe their conversions fully effective, or did they recognize that theirs was a conversion of convenience? I mean, I think what's going on here is that it was a community that remained part of Israel for centuries, right? So what originally happened, where their questionable conversion was back in the first temple period, and now they're talking about what is going to be the status of Samaritans after the second temple period, 600 years later. So how much could they really know about the original conversions? I guess what they're saying is because they weren't subscribing to the sages and the oral tradition, that's what would allow mamzers to be assimilated into their community, and that's why it was prohibited to marry them. Now, a Samaritan that wanted, to have a full-fledged, wanted to be a full-fledged Jew, could immerse in the mikvah and say, I am converting. I say, I accept as a Samaritan that the sages don't accept me as a Jew, and I want to be a full-fledged Jew. They could do that. But that's a separate issue. Sharon also says, in the observant community in Israel still today, they hire men to investigate future spouses, both sexes, to affirm their acceptability in a number of areas, most notably any conversions that took place. I sat on a plane returning from Israel next to one such investigator. It was fascinating. Thank you. Belle, in the book and TV series The Beauty Queen of Jerusalem, I'm not familiar with that, it was stated that there was a list that rabbis kept as to who was a member. I don't know the truth of this fictional representation. I mean, listen, you have to understand that in Israel, there is the rabbinate, right, that sort of controls these matters. And there are rabbis in America who perform conversions that, as far as the rabbis, sort of run the rabbinate of Israel, that those rabbis are not qualified to perform those conversions. The reason being that they will convert a person who does not commit to start living a Shomer Shabbos life. So, like, if you're converting to Judaism and right at the outset you're not keeping Shabbos, then what kind of a conversion is that, right? And so conversions that, where some kind of rabbi or rabbinic group allows those conversions are going to be disqualified according to the rabbinate in Jerusalem. That's very broad strokes on this issue. I have no competence or qualification to talk about those issues, which are very delicate, sensitive, difficult issues. But just in broad strokes, that's the kinds of issues that still come up today. Bill asks a question. Does the Gentile have to have held the object to be an idol in order to remove that status? Could a Christian or Muslim, for example, set up a small service to deconsecrate idols which he or she didn't worship in any way so that their Jewish neighbors could use the materials? I'm not familiar with this law. I just read it in passing today, so I don't know. But it sounds like maybe what you're saying would work. The key is that the Gentile takes this object that was used for idolatry, and he, the Gentile, deconsecrates it. It was never consecrated under Jewish law, but, sort of takes it out of the realm of idolatry by doing something degrading to it, right? And saying, probably, maybe to make this work, maybe it would have to be not so much that he used it himself, but that it was from his particular religion, and that he's turning his back on. I don't know. I have no idea. This would require further research. Very interesting question. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Have a good night.